Good evening. Why so many absent today? Sit. Exam started. Which school? Okay. Now, what was the last topic we completed, Sunny? Structure of brain. No? We were discussing the structure of brain.
Yes.
Yes. So we will continue from there.
अरे पर ब्रेन का
नहीं Now we talk about the structure of the brain. We already finished with forebrain. What did we learn about the parts of the forebrain? How many of them from the school? So many. Here so many were there. No? कितने absent है? देखो attendance sheet.
लड़के भी absent है एक ही लड़का है
पांच लोग absent है. Which other school? Okay, now we start again. We were talking about the forebrain. What are the parts of the forebrain? Number one, we studied about cerebrum. What are some features about the cerebrum? Cerebrum is the largest region of the brain. Next word, cerebrum is extensively folded. The arrangement of the neurons in the cerebrum extensively folded. Between the folds, there are some gaps and grooves. That was the second feature. Next is what? What about the arrangement of the neurons in the cerebrum? What did I tell you? What about the arrangement of the neurons in the cerebrum? Talk about the arrangement of the neurons in this upper region. Which part of the neuron? The cytosol. And in the inner region, which part of the neuron? Axon. That is the reason the upper region appears grayish and the inner region appears whitish. Name the bony cover of the brain. What is it? Cranium or the skull. And what is the membranous cover of the brain? Meninges. What are the functions we had come across? Give me all those three functions now, one after the other. The first function of cerebrum carries out all the voluntary functions. Number two, sensory perceptions like vision, hearing, smell, taste, etc. Third type of a function is behavioral functions like reasoning, memory power, willpower, thinking, reasoning, all these also are the functions of cerebrum. Next we have talked about hypothalamus, the next region of forebrain. Where is hypothalamus? Hypothalamus is particularly present here. When I talk about the hypothalamus, put this upper one. Hypothalamus. When you talk about hypothalamus is at this particular region. That is also a part of the forebrain. What was the major function of hypothalamus we studied? The major function is regulate body temperature. Now there are various different processes we are talking about. The hypothalamus regulates all those complex processes and regulates the body temperature. What is the other function we had learned? Regulates the rhythms like sleep and wakefulness, hunger and thirst. So these are the two functions we studied. Midbrain, nothing much. I already told you the other day. Talk about this part of the brain, the midbrain, which has got a pair of many pairs of accumulation of neurons, lobes of neurons, that is what is termed as. This entire midbrain has lobes of neurons in pairs. And what are these lobes of neurons doing? Again, carrying out variety of sensory functions like the vision and the hearing and taste and smell, almost like what the cerebrum does. So when we talk about the midbrain, I would just mention some of them. All these are not there also in your book, but just to understand major one or two functions. The midbrain, just now as I said, that it has got variety of lobes. So I would say maybe now I talk about one type of lobe, the occipital lobe, which generally helps in vision. Then we are talking about the olfactory lobes, which generally help in smell, the perception of smell. Then we talk about the auditory lobe, and this auditory lobe generally helps in hearing. So the midbrain is something like this, a whole lot of lobulated neurons helping in all such functions. Specific group of neurons, a specific function. Important now is the hindbrain. Hindbrain, the posterior region of the brain, and what are the parts, what are their functions. First is I talk about the hindbrain. I first talk about the cerebellum. Where is the cerebellum? Almost at the base of the head. This is the cerebellum that we understand. Features of the cerebellum quite similar like the cerebrum. When I talk about cerebellum, the cerebellum also has got halves, just like the cerebrum. What were the halves of the cerebrum known as? Cerebral hemispheres. I told you the other day that if you talk about the entire cerebrum, is it a single fused region? No, it is two different halves. There's a right half, there's a left half. Even for the cerebellum, also if you can see here, there is a faint dividing line where the group of neurons actually are parted, where the group of neurons are actually divided into two groups. And these groups are now known as the halves, also known as the cerebellar hemispheres. The cerebellar hemispheres. There we talk about cerebral, and here we talk about cerebellar hemispheres. What are cerebellar hemispheres? Half of cerebellum. Next is the cerebellum is also folded and has grooves. The cerebellum is also folded and has grooves. Function. What is the function of the cerebellum? The major function of the cerebellum is to control muscular coordination. That is the major function of the cerebellum. So the first function of cerebellum is to control muscular coordination, regulate muscular coordination. So we will write control muscular coordination is the first function. Can you tell me or give me an example of muscular coordination right now that you're doing? You are listening, you are writing, coordination is happening, right? Apart from that, all throughout the day, there is enough of muscular coordination happening. No? Say suppose you are eating your food and watching TV. Correct? I was about to say flipping the pages of the book. No, on tapping the phone. That is the appropriate example. Shameless creature, same as well. Control muscular activity. So we are talking about control muscular coordination. Apart from that, control muscular coordination and regulate body balance. Regulate body balance. Now, what is the meaning of body balance? Cerebellum regulates body balance. What does that mean? Now that you are sitting, are you able to hold your body? Yes. Now that you run, you swim, you play, are you able to hold your body? Yes. Even when we sleep, we are able to hold our body. We don't slide down from the bed. No? So now this is because the cerebellum constantly keeps receiving signals and coordinating with muscles of the body. Can you give me a situation where the body is not being controlled properly? Under what different situation a person cannot control the body? Paralysis, that's a different disease condition. Normally, under effect of alcohol. or under effect of drugs. So under any type of an intoxication, this you get as a question in your paper. An alcoholic, why does an alcoholic walk clumsily? Alcoholic would walk very clumsily, no? Alcoholic would always slide down, would always roll down. The person is not able to hold the body because the cerebellar neurons are not able to receive signals and give responses accordingly. So what are the two major functions you write about cerebellum? Muscular coordination and regulate or maintain body balance. The next that we talk about, the next part of the hindbrain, the next part of the hindbrain is pons Beroli. This is known as pons Beroli. So now we talk about pons Beroli, the second part. In your textbook, the name that is given is part of it. So you may write down the complete name there in your textbook or the volume. I want all of you to take this diagram out and complete the name here. It's written pons, you complete the name. Pons Beroli, it is written there. So pons Beroli is the second part of the hindbrain. What is its function? Features of pons Beroli we would always write. It connects, pons Beroli connects the cerebellum to, pons Beroli always connects the cerebellum to the spinal cord. What type of function does it regulate? The pons Beroli, what type of function? Rate of respiration. It always regulates the rate of respiration. Regulates the rate of respiration, the rate of breathing. So when we are talking about the rate of respiration or breathing, can you tell me under what different condition the rate of breathing would generally go up?
Swimming.
When you are swimming, running, walking, vigorous muscular activity. So now whenever we are running, walking, swimming, etc., why should the breathing rate go up? More oxygen. So now the neurons of this particular region will give signals to all the muscles of the ribs and the diaphragm, etc., etc., to bring about the process of breathing much faster so that we can take in more and more oxygen. And if you are not able to take in more and more oxygen, that's the time when the muscle go for fatigue and muscle twitches would happen, cramps would happen. So regulate the rate of breathing. When would the rate of breathing be very low? Does it happen? Rate of breathing very low? When we are sick, or a person goes, or when a person has suffered from a major accident or a major surgery, then the rate of breathing becomes very low. Now, if I give you a question, if you get a question in your paper, what is the rate of breathing, or which part of the body would regulate the rate of breathing at higher altitude? Is there any need when the rate of breathing has to be regulated at a higher altitude? When we go to higher altitude, what happens? Does the rate of breathing increase or decrease?
Increase.
Why?
Oxygen supply.
To take in more oxygen, no? To take in more and more oxygen, because as we go to higher and higher altitudes, free oxygen is lesser. So that's the reason we start panting and we start breathing and gasping for oxygen. The body starts getting more and more of oxygen. So which part of the body starts or helps us in survival at that time? It is the pons Beroli. The last part that we talk about would be the medulla. The last part that we talk about is medulla, also known as, the complete name is medulla oblongata. Now, medulla oblongata is what? Also known as the brain stem. This particular region, medulla oblongata, is also known as the brain stem. What is the function of the medulla? It controls all the involuntary functions. It controls the involuntary functions of the body. It controls all the involuntary functions of the body. When I say involuntary functions, what do you understand? What do you understand? What is the definition of involuntary that we have studied already in the ninth?
When we can't control.
Contractions of the body or body movements that we cannot control. Give me 3 examples of involuntary action. Pumping of the blood by the heart. Yes, contraction of the heart. What else? Blinking of eyes. Okay, partly. And breathing movements. Movement of the blood in the blood vessels. Involuntary. Movement of the inhaled air through the air tubes or the trachea. Involuntary. Movement of the food in the esophagus. Involuntary. All these are involuntary functions because of digestion. When here, bolo.
Now, during panic attacks, we observe that the breathing rate is very high, but we do not do any muscular activities. So,
Because due to certain reason, due to some improper blood pressure or malfunction inside the body is striving for oxygen at that time. The body is striving for whatever reason, the body is striving for oxygen. That's the reason at that time the person is gasping for more oxygen, and the breathing rate is increasing to combat with that. So that's the time at that time the person needs some additional help. No? So when we are talking about medulla, what is the main function of the medulla? You should remember, medulla always helps in regulating all the involuntary functions of the body. So if you have to name some involuntary functions of the body, beating of the heart, movement of the inhaled air in the trachea, movement of the blood in the blood vessels, contraction of the iris, all these are functions that you will write down. Okay. Now this is about the brain that we have come across. Next, what is the other part of when we are talking about the central nervous system? What is the other part of the central nervous system? The spinal cord. The other part. We were talking about the central nervous system. The central nervous system is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. To talk about the spinal cord, what is spinal cord? Where is it present? What is its bony covering, etc., etc. We have to learn. So now that we talk about the spinal cord, what is the spinal cord? How can we define the spinal cord? What is the spinal cord? The spinal cord is actually a bundle of neurons. Yes or no? Yes. The spinal cord is actually a bundle of neurons. And from where are these bundle of neurons emerging out? It is emerging out from the brain. The spinal cord, a bundle of neurons and emerging out from the brain. But rather, bundle of axons, I would write. Bundle of axons and emerging from the brain. Emerging out from the brain. But why do I say bundle of axons? Why not bundle of neurons to complete? Because whenever we are talking about the spinal cord, which is running all throughout, the cyton part of the neuron are all outside. Understood? The cyton is all outside. And here is only the long white axon which bundles up. The cyton is not here. The cyton is all outside. The cyton is all outside. So if I talk about the spinal cord, say suppose I'm talking about the spinal cord here, and I understand that how does the spinal cord run? The spinal cord will only have, if this is a neuron and the dendrites and the axon here. This is the neurons, dendrites and the axon here. This is the dendrites and the axon here. This is the dendrites and the axon here. Following? So this is how millions and millions of dendrites, millions and millions of neurons come together. Millions and millions of neurons will come together where the cyton is outside and the axon generally forms the bundle. The cyton is outside and the axon generally forms the bundle. So now when we are talking about what is this spinal cord actually, the spinal cord is actually nothing but bundle of axon. What about the protective structure? If I have to talk about the protective structure of the spinal cord, protective membranes are what? The protective membranes of the spinal cord. The protective membranes, if I have to understand, the first again, the bony cover. What about the protective structure? The bony structure would be the backbone. What is the backbone, also known as vertebral column? And if I have to talk about the membranous cover, it is the same as the brain. And the membranous cover, I would say it is the same as the brain, the meninges. It is the same as the brain, the meninges. So talk about this entire region, talk about this entire vertebral column. The entire vertebral column is hollow from inside, and it is through this hollow that the spinal cord runs. So if I talk about that, this entire region of the vertebral column just now that we were talking about, that if you now look into that, this is the entire vertebral column, the entire vertebral column. This series of bones are there, and where is this bundle of neurons running? The bundle of neurons are running like this, exactly through the center. So this is the vertebral column I'm talking about. And what is there in the central hollow of the vertebral column? The spinal cord. And the spinal cord and the vertebral column, what is the difference? Vertebral column is just the bony covering, the casing. How many bones in the vertebral column? 33 such bones put together in a series. What is common in all these bones? The central region is all hollow. And what is running in this entire hollow? A bundle of neurons, something that we are calling it as the spinal cord. Clear? Based on which location of the spinal cord, based on which location of the vertebral column, the number of those neurons, or the neurons also are named separately and numbered. I talk about the regions of the entire spinal cord grouped up, grouped up, grouped up. How are we grouping up? Based on the regions of the body. So, based on the regions of the body, the spinal cord can be grouped up in 5 main regions. What are those 5 main regions? Let us talk about. I am talking about the spinal cord and the types of the neurons that make up the spinal cord. The first one is the cervical vertebrae. So when we say that these entire neck region is known as the cervical region, the neck region, cervical vertebrae. So the spinal cord also can be classified that way. So we would say the cervical region is one. What next? We would say the thoracic region. Third is the lumbar region. Fourth is the sacral. And fifth is the coccyx. Now this is just for you to understand that the spinal cord, just like the vertebral column, also can be divided into certain groups. Groups how? Based on the regions of the body. Cervical region means the neck region. Thoracic means the chest region. Lumbar means the upper hip region. Sacral means the lower hip region. And coccyx would mean the tail region, which for us is rudimentary. What is the meaning of rudimentary? Remain as a remnant now. It is just remaining as a remnant. Just a rudimentary part है जो अभी कोई function नहीं है. So spinal cord. Now that we talk about the function of the spinal cord, we try to understand. Next में जाओ. Now we try to understand the spinal cord. When we try looking into the spinal cord, with reference to spinal cord and the location, we'll also have to understand that what is the spinal cord doing in our body? What is the spinal cord doing in our body? Major function of the spinal cord क्या है? The spinal cord regulates all the different type of involuntary functions of the body, and सबसे important, the spinal cord regulates reflexes. Spinal cord regulates reflexes. So, दो function जो अभी लिखेंगे for the spinal cord. What are some of the major functions that the spinal cord regulates? The spinal cord regulates, number 1, involuntary functions of the body. The brain also regulates. Which part of the brain regulates the involuntary functions? Medulla. Medulla. Medulla regulates involuntary functions. And cerebellum, what does it do? Cerebellum, what does it do?
Controls muscular quality
And
and regulates body.
body balance. Very good. So now, when we are talking about the spinal cord, what is the function of the spinal cord? Involuntary functions. And second is regulates all the different types of reflexes. Regulates reflexes. Now, we try understanding then what is reflex. Now, the next concept is that. What are reflexes then? So, reflex समझने के पहले we'll try understanding एक और concept, that is the types of neurons. How many types of neurons? Before we understand reflex, we'll have to understand that. What are the types of neurons? What are neurons? What are neurons?
Neurons are the structural and functional unit of the nervous system.
System. ऐसा क्यों सोचने दे रहे हो? याद है कि नहीं? What are neurons? Neurons are structural and functional unit of the nervous system. Where are they present in our body? All over the body. Neurons. Now that we talk about the neurons, see here, did we talk about the word receptor?
No, no photoreceptor or Wolfram.
Right? So to understand this, first of all, we have to understand receptor क्या है? What is a receptor? Receptor is a specialized group of cells which can receive stimulus. Stimulus का मतलब क्या था? Receive information. Clear है? So I would say receptors. हमारी body में कहाँ पे receptors or which parts of the body can act as a receptor? The skin, the ear, the eye, the nose, the tongue. These can act as a receptor. Is the brain a receptor? No. Brain is the regulating center. Message आता है, उसमें regulation होती है and the commands to give. So now I would exactly. Now when we are talking about the types of the neurons, what are the types of the neurons? Very fast, we have to first understand it. Types of the neurons. To understand, there are certain types of neurons like the sensory neuron. Then we have got the association neuron, and then we have got the motor neuron. Now, look into this diagram. You have a similar diagram in your book also. Put this first. Now, if I talk about this, let us first understand with this figure, then we will write out the definition and the differences. When I talk about what is happening here, we touch something hot and then we withdraw our hand immediately. ऐसे एक और similar situation बोलो फटाफट. If somebody pinches you, immediately you withdraw और उसको एक. So now when we are talking immediately the immediately cold water छूने के बाद. So now when immediately we show our response, उसको बोलेंगे reflex. Now that I am asking you a question and you are giving me an answer, वो reflex है?
No.
That is program. उसमें the brain is constantly giving you commands कि ऐसा बोल, ऐसा नहीं बोल. So now this is what the brain is. This is what we call it as the thinking process of the brain. But you are walking on the road. You are walking on the road very happily. You are walking and chatting with your friend happily, and then suddenly you get to see a big pothole, and then you jump backwards. Right? You under.
Jump forward.
उसके ऊपर से जंप.
So ऊपर से भी then also you are taking a prompt decision, no? An immediate response we show. That is what is reflex. Generally हम रुकेंगे नहीं when we are running or walking or in a flow. Either we will jump back or jump forward. Immediate response we will show something. So now quite a number of times when we do this type of an activity where there is a prompt response that we show, that is what is response always. Now in that process, what are some of the parts involved? The parts involved, number one, if I talk about this example, which part of the body is acting as a receptor here? The skin of the fingers acting as receptor. Why are we saying that this is a part which is acting as a receptor? Because it is receiving the information, receiving the message. Receiving the message from here, from this fingertips, the message immediately runs by a set of neurons where it will immediately run to the spinal cord, but from the spinal cord it is also supposed to go to the brain. But now, since it is a situation bit different from the programmed activity, now the messages does not go from the spinal cord to the brain, but the spinal cord immediately decides what to be done. So the spinal cord will pass on. Inside the spinal cord itself, the processing has been done. This neuron which had taken messages from the receptor to the CNS is called CNS. Why? Spinal cord and brain forms the CNS, central nervous system. Basically, now that I am constantly speaking, the messages are constantly getting programmed in the brain. कि इसके बाद ये बोलना है, इसके बाद ये बोलना है. But in such type of a situation, no, the brain is not involved at all. In such type of a situation, the brain is not involved. What happens? The receptor has carried the message to the CNS. Which neuron carried the message now? The sensory neuron. So what is the job of the sensory neuron? Carrying messages or information from the receptor to the CNS. Here in the CNS, otherwise, normally every time the spinal cord would carry the messages to the brain and wait for the commands of the brain. But now, since we are talking about a prompt response required, the spinal cord is not waiting for the command from the brain. Immediately the processing is happening here. Messages go from the sensory to the association neuron, which are small neurons between the sensory and the motor. And the motor neuron, एक और जो prolonged neuron होती है, which is carrying the message from the spinal cord back to another part of the body or same part of the body, उसको हम बोलेंगे effector. So what am I saying now? Here, to understand, first of all, what is the sensory neuron doing? The sensory neuron is actually carrying messages from the receptor to the CNS. Yes or no? Receptor to CNS. So when I talk about the sensory neuron will always carry messages from receptor to CNS. But when I talk about CNS, majorly I would write spinal cord if it is a reflex. If it is a reflex, otherwise both spinal cord and brain. What is the job of the association neuron then? Carry information from, look into the figure and tell me, carry information from the sensory to motor neuron. Yes or no? Yes. Carry information from the sensory to the motor neuron. Where are these association neurons present? Inside the spinal cord. These are small neurons. Third, what is the job of the motor neuron then? Carry impulses, information. Carry impulses from where to where? From CNS to effector. From CNS to effector. What is an effector? And what is a receptor? Now we have to understand these two words. What is an effector and what is a receptor? Receptors are parts of the body which will receive stimulus. Receptors are parts of the body which will receive the stimulus. And what about the effector? Effector will always show responses. Yes or no? I now talk about the word receptor. What is a receptor? What are the different types of receptors that we have in our body? Receptor, specialized group of cells. What are receptors? Specialized group of cells. Different regions of the body, specialized group of cells that can receive stimulus. That can receive stimulus. Give me two examples of stimuli. What did we learn the other day with neurons? Two examples of stimuli. क्या लिखना है? Is sound a stimulus?
No.
Yes.
Yes.
Sound is a stimulus. Light a stimulus.
Yes.
Pinch, touch, prick, stimulus.
Yes.
Yes. Smell, stimulus. No.
Yes.
So now that we are, why are we saying that these are all stimulus? Because for everything, each of these events we show our response. Sound hai. The other day I asked you, why are you looking at me? And you all got scared. Habib, now why are you looking at me again? Because I'm constantly blabbering something. No, that's why you are looking at me. So now, if the lights suddenly now go off, all of you will look up. Kya ho gaya? So immediately there's a response that we show. So receptors kya hai? Specialized group of cells which are constantly receiving stimuli. Demo नहीं चाहिए. वो बेचारा भोला भाला उसको तुम क्यों टॉर्चर कर रहे हो? हाँ? दिखा वो टी-शर्ट में क्या लिखा है? 1965 क्यों?
Since 1965.
1965 क्या है?
तब वो ब्रांड बना था।
हाँ?
ब्रांड वो तब बना था।
1965 तो ब्रांड का नाम है?
ब्रांड ईयर में बना था।
Now, when we are talking about receptors, what do we understand? Receptor, anything you see start very. 1965 में तो घूमेगा भी रास्ते पर.
हाँ।
Teach your parents as head to buy all this nonsense. खुद लेके आया. Wow, parents ने दिया इतना pocket money.
खुद लेकर आया, मैं नहीं लेकर आया.
अच्छा, parents लेके आए. Speechless. Now, when we are talking about this specialized group of cells, so what are the different types of receptors now? Let us talk about what are the different type of receptors then. I talk about our eyes, photoreceptors. Which are the photoreceptors? Which is the photoreceptor of our body? The eyes. What type of stimulus?
Light.
Light. I talk about the second is the phonoreceptors.
Yes.
I talk about the phonoreceptors. Which part of the body is the ears? What is the stimulus? Sound. Third है olfactory receptors. If it is the olfactory receptors, then nose, smell. Stimulus is smell there. I talk about gustatory receptor. Gustatory receptor, taste. So we talk about the tongue. And the fifth is
Taste is not
tongue.
no. I said what tongue? Tongue, not taste. Tongue. वो 1965 में अभी भी सोच रहा हूँ. Mechanoreceptor what? Skin. What would be the stimulus here?
मैम वॉल्यूम में 4 दिए और टेक्स्ट में 4.
5 पढ़ लेना, क्या प्रॉब्लम है? So now when we are talking about receptors, what are receptors you understand now? Specialized parts of the body which was received stimulus.
मैम तो इसमें मैकेनो रिसेप्टर यूज है ना.
हाँ, तो इसमें तो मेकानो सारे एग्जांपल्स ज्यादातर मेकानो रिसेप्टर्स के ही होंगे. हाँ, इसमें स्टिमुली, if I say eyes, stimulus होगा light, ears, stimulus होगा sound, nose, smell,
टेस्ट.
tongue,
taste.
chemicals, taste या तो chemicals है, skin, touch or pressure or pain or prick. So all this will come here. Touch or any type of a prick or a pressure, all this will come here. So ये हो गया receptors. But now we try understanding that what is an effector then? Effector को target gland भी बोला जाता है. Effector is also known as the target gland. So what is an effector? What is an effector? Part of the body that shows a response. Effector is always the part of the body that shows response, shows an action, reaction actually, shows a response. So I would say if I have to give examples of a effector or a target gland, can we talk about muscle as an effector? Yes.
Yes.
Can we talk about certain glands of the body as an effector? Yes. So what is an effector doing? An effector is always showing some response. Now let us talk about an example. Here, 2-3 conditions. क्या हो गया? इधर आ जाओ.
अभी उनको उधर से नहीं दिख रहा एक्चुअली मैं इधर.
इतनी लंबी क्यों हुई थी? ये प्रॉब्लम हो गया. So now when we are talking about this, the muscles of the hand or the skin. Let us talk about this. Here, the skin is acting as a receptor, carrying messages. Which neuron carrying messages to the CNS? Sensory. Sensory neurons sending messages to the association neuron. Association neuron sending messages to the motor neuron. अब ये motor neuron कहाँ से कहाँ message लेके आ रहा है? From the CNS to the effector. But now you see the receptor and the effector is almost the same part of the body, no? You are touching the pot or the kettle which is very hot and you withdraw your hand. So the fingertips, receptor and the hand muscles, the effector, almost very close. Can you give me an example where the receptor and effector far away? Receptor and effector far away. What? No example? Think of an example, receptor and effector far away. Huh?
Brain not brain.
No? Suddenly one lizard falls on your head. Skin is sensing and you are, if it happens to me, I would scream or shout. So now the muscles, the part of the body which is receiving the message and the part of the body which is showing the response is not the same. I'm walking down on the road and then I am happily walking down on the road. Suddenly I see a big snake or there on the footpath. I take a back step. So I saw with the help of my eyes and then I back step. So what is happening? The leg muscles are reacting, showing the response. Give me one example if you have understood this. Receptor and effector far away.
Ma'am.
When we are
Happily walking. हाँ.
suddenly
A vehicle. That is what happened to her right now. This is what happened to her in the evening. हाँ. एक और.
वही बोल रहा था बस बस के लगी गाड़ी
हाँ, exactly. When somebody is throwing something to you, and then maybe now you are catching that ball. Say somebody throwing the ball at you. Which is the receptor? Eyes are the receptor. Effector क्या है? The hand muscle. Hand is acting as the effector. So there are situations where the receptor and the effector would be the same, and there are situations where receptor effector would be far away. So with this reference, we are to understand then what is a reflex. What is a reflex? What is the definition of the word reflex action? What is reflex action? How do you define? Reflex action is, write down the definition of reflex action and reflex are. We'll have to learn these two topics now. What is reflex action? Write down the definition. The spontaneous. What is the definition of reflex action? The spontaneous, automatic, rapid, involuntary, the spontaneous, automatic, rapid and involuntary response by body parts, regulated by spinal cord. Regulated by spinal cord is known as reflex action. Also reflex is known as reflex action. I repeat, what is reflex action? Reflex action is the spontaneous, rapid, involuntary, automatic response shown by different parts of the body controlled by spinal cord. Now remember, whenever I am talking about the concept of reflex action, it is absolutely different from the way we are writing, the way we are talking. How? Because now that you plan to say something, you plan to ask a question, I plan to say a topic or introduce a topic, explain a topic. What is happening? The spinal cord and the brain, they are working together. CNS, both. The spinal cord and the brain working together. Now after the class, now that you will be walking down the stairs or the lift, the spinal cord and the brain walking together always are in coordination. They will always work together. But the moment I talk about a reflex, it is only which part? Only the spinal cord immediately taking the responsibility. Why not the messages go to the brain? Late हो जाएगा. Exactly. The messages अगर brain तक जाना है, वापस commands आना है, we may end up into an injury, accident. We may end up in an accident or an injury. Now say suppose the same situation, you touch something hot. अगर इसमें brain involved होता, then a couple of minutes would have gone by the time the message goes and when the commands come. So in that process, we may burn our fingers. क्या हो जाएगा फिर? जल जाएगा. ये बड़ा ही बंद है. मामा खाना नहीं खाएगा. इसलिए अच्छा है टीवी देखते रहो बैठ के. So now when we are talking about this, any type of the reflex you think of, only the spinal cord. Why does the spinal cord does not send the message to the brain during such type of a situation? Because the thinking process of the brain is cut down. The spinal cord gives commands immediately to protect our body from any type of an injury or accident. So what is then reflex R? Now we will write down what is the pathway of reflex R. If this is reflex action, then what is reflex R? Write down the definition and we will have to write down the pathway also. What is reflex R? Reflex R, write down the shortest pathway. What is reflex R? The shortest pathway of nerve impulse transmission. The shortest pathway of nerve impulse transmission is known as reflex arc. I'm sorry, इसमें CNS add. What is it? What is this? This is
sneezing the reflex section मैम देखो मैम sneeze करोगे तो फिर मैम किधर तो गिरने वाला होगा तो reflex section
it is an involuntary action. So when we are talking about reflex R, what did you write? What is the definition of reflex R? The shortest pathway of nerve impulse transmission. इसको shortest pathway क्यों बोलते हैं? Why is it known as the shortest pathway? Because brain is not involved. The thinking process of the brain is not involved. That's the reason it is known as the shortest pathway. Write down this pathway, all of you. This is what you are going to write down when you talk about reflex R. Now, something more, the receptors. If I talk about, add this word stimulus is to receptor. Then what should I write for effector? Response. What is the function of the receptor? To receive stimulus. And what is the job of the effector? To show response. To show response. Because all of you will write down this pathway. Check करो ना next. Done? Any doubts? Any doubts? The next part of the chapter that we are going to go through here, major parts of the brain functions to study, reflex action, parts of types of the neurons, their functions, short concepts that you have to study all of these, specific 1-1 या 2-2 mark के questions आते हैं, and certain times some application question, assertion questions you will get. See that you are able to relate to those topics and answer the questions. The next part that we are going to start would be this is what so far we were talking about was nervous coordination. Coordination by the way of neurons. What is the difference between neuron and nerve? Nerves are bundles of neurons, and neuron is the finest fiber, structural functional unit. So now we talk about nervous coordination. Till here. The next part that we talk about would be chemical coordination. That's the next part of your chapter there. Chemical coordination. What are we going to study here under the concept of chemical coordination? Coordination is not only by the way of neurons, but chemical coordination is also by the way of chemicals released by specialized parts of our body. Plant hormones I will take later. Let us finish with the animal hormone. Just see if I have a slide on that.
Yeah, it's extraction and stuff.
नीचे जा. No, नहीं है.
नहीं है कुछ भी भाई.
Hormones. We'll complete with hormones there. When we are talking about, go here.
Endocrine.
Now we talk about this. Let us start with this figure when we are talking about the endocrine glands. Now we'll talk about this. This is a major part of the chapter. Plant hormones, very easily you'll be able to understand that. This is a very important part of the chapter. Now next that we go, chemical coordination. So far, since we are talking about the human body parts, let us finish at one go about the human physiology, then we go to the plants. Now that we are talking about chemical coordination, coordination by the way of chemicals. Variety of chemical substances produced in one part of the body can regulate function in another part of the body. That is what we are talking about as chemical coordination. So to understand the concept of chemical coordination, here we are talking about some specialized glands of our body, and what are these specialized glands known as endocrine glands. What are endocrine glands? Specialized glands which can release chemical substances known as hormones. What is the definition? What are these glands? Specialized glands release or specialized glands in different regions of the body which releases hormones. Specialized glands releasing hormones. Now, when we are talking about this word hormones, we are coming across the concept of hormones for the first time. What are hormones and what are some specialized function of the hormones? To talk about the concept of hormones, let us start understanding some major features. What are hormones? Hormones are special chemical substances released by endocrine gland. That is always the first point to remember. What are hormones? Definition क्या है? Hormones are special chemical substances released by endocrine glands. So वैसे तो, if I talk about other glands of the body, can you tell me? Give me one example of a gland. Pancreas, liver, pituitary. तो ये ऐसा वाला gland हो गया. So now I have salivary gland. Gallbladder. So now, if I talk about, let me just take one particular example. I talk about the stomach. Now, I talk about the stomach. Now, this particular stomach that we are talking about, surrounding the stomach, which particular gland? The liver. The cells of the liver are capable of producing specific chemical substances. So, I would say that there is certain structure known as the gallbladder. And then there are some tube-like structure carrying the secretions of the liver and coordinate here in the duodenum. But if I have to talk about this type of glands, I would always understand that these glands are very close to the blood vessel, whichever gland I talk about. Pancreas. They don't have any such tubes to carry their secretions, but these secretions will directly diffuse and enter into the blood. Okay, we'll complete here. We'll wind up here with this word. Hormones are released directly into the bloodstream.
Of endocrine.
These are the features of hormones. Directly released into the bloodstream. Hormones are directly released into the bloodstream. The moment we talk about hormones, always to remember, they are never carried by any tubes. We'll again start from this part the next day.
And